Welcome to a new time. Welcome to a new era.
This ain't WCW. This ain't Monday Night Raw. This ain't SmackDown. This ain't even WWE.
Feel the wrath of the pythons. You shall feel the wrath of Hulkamania. This is where the power lies.
And that's the bottom line because Stone Cold said so.
He put hard times on Dusty Rhodes and his family.
I got a 66 and 2/3 chance of winning because Kurt Angle knows he can't beat me and he's not even going to try.
It's time to step into the squared circle and get it done.
Welcome everyone to the Legends and Champions podcast, coming to you live to tape. I love saying that. Bit of echoing, a bit of Colt Cabana from his old Art of Wrestling podcast. How's everybody doing? Andy Evans here, coming to you from Weymouth here in the United Kingdom, as I do each and every week. Got a big show coming up this week, following on from the Mr. McMahon bio, really, if you want to call it that, the 70-minute special on Mr. McMahon. Thank you to everyone for your feedback. I'm glad you enjoyed it. This week is going to be something different. We're going to be looking at the legacy of Halloween Havoc. Now, it is October. We're very close now to Halloween, so it seems like the perfect opportunity to do a bit of Halloween talk. So that's what we're going to do. Halloween Havoc, we're going to be looking at its concept, we're going to be looking at some of the top matches that have taken place, and we're also going to be looking at some of the worst. And trust me, there have been some stinkers, and we're going to touch all on that throughout this show. But what's happened in the world of professional wrestling this week? Of course, we've said goodbye to Samantha Irvin from the WWE. She made a shock for some people, not maybe for others, a shock departure from the WWE on Monday, just hours before Monday Night Raw kicked off. And now we've welcomed back the voice of the Golden Era. Lillian Garcia is back in the WWE, and I've got to admit, she made a blooper just 5 minutes coming in. But how good was it to see Lillian back on that Raw stage? And whether or not she's back permanently, I don't know. You know, there's been talk about the fact that Samantha Irvin's not going to All Elite. Do you know what? I wouldn't necessarily believe that. I think she is. But let's wait and see what happens. Whatever you think of Sam, and there's been a lot of feedback on Team MOW about her, is she was incredibly talented in what she did. And she did bring a whole new level of intro and different sort of characterization that you didn't get with some of the other announcers. She wasn't vanilla. She was unique in her delivery, and I think that really set her apart to any announcer within wrestling, you know, regardless of WWE or All Elite or even TNA. Now, what else have you been doing this week? I'm going to move away from professional wrestling just for a second, because last night, taping this on Thursday morning, last night, I went to the cinema. Now, I haven't been to the cinema, the movies, for a very, very long time. For me, you know, I've got a 6-year-old, so I normally have to go and see kids' films. It's like the last one I think we went to see was Despicable Me, maybe? Despicable Me 4? Could have been. I mean, great film, but, you know, it is for the little ones. The worst one I ever had to go and see was about a unicorn. Yeah, some people thought wrestling was bad. Anyway, yesterday, back on subject, I went to see Transformers 1, which was the origin story in CGI, and the first CGI film that they've ever done within Transformers. And it's been slated by some people. I loved it. But it was brilliant. The only thing that I wish they'd done is brought Peter Cullen in just to do a cameo, just so you could have heard, which is a staple, right? Just so you could have heard that iconic Prime voice in another character just one more time. But it's a brilliant film. If you haven't seen it, check it out. It is available now on digital in US and Canada, I believe, so you can rent it and watch it. Pick it up if you're a Transformers fan. So many Easter eggs for G1, for the live action films, to the comics. You know, my mate who I was with is more of a Transformers fan than I am. I love it, but he's like a nutter for it. And he was like going, that's from the comics, that's from the comics, that's from the comics. It's brilliant. Check it out. That's my movie recommendation. Now, each and every week on this show, before we get into the main thing, what do? I give you the weather update. Joe Aguinaldo you're a legend, my friend. You're an absolute legend. You've tried to do an intro for me. I think you're still working on that. So I'm just going to tell you what the weather is, and just imagine that Joe is doing an intro for me. It's cold. It's cold. It's dry, which is unusual, but it's cold. And I suppose we are at the end of October now. But I just want to say, I saw a video of Mike. I'm really going for it. I saw a video of Mike on Facebook the other day promoting the charity radio show that he did Monday, which if you haven't listened to it yet, go check it out on the podcast feed. Absolutely brilliant. How snowy is it in Canada? I mean, I'm jealous. We don't get snow here. Well, we do in mainland, but I live on the south coast, so I don't get snow. I haven't seen snow for years. I miss snow. Can I come to Canada? I want snow. Anyway, enough rabble. We're going to go and start talking about Halloween Havoc. I'll see you in a minute. Alright, so Halloween Havoc, one of those staple pay-per-views for WCW, regardless of what you know now about it being within NXT. Its lineage was back in there. And in the late 1980s, Jim Crockett Promotions, which was rebranded as WCW, due to being acquired by TBS, Turner Broadcasting, in 1988. And WCW wanted to compete on this national scale with Vince McMahon and the WWF. And what they did was, at the time, they went, we need to be different. We can't compete with the global reach. We can't compete with the house gates. We can't compete really with the TV ratings. Our ratings are in the toilet. We're in debt. Even though we're funded by Turner, we're in debt. Vince has got the market. He's doing this. What can we do to make it different? So they decided to go beyond the traditional wrestling format. They decided that actually what they were going to do was go a little bit out there. They were going to go a little bit nuts, a little bit crazy. There was the birth of Halloween Havoc, a concoction which was just sheer brilliance of wrestling mayhem and Halloween horror. And the idea was actually the creation of Jim Herd, who was the then executive VP of WCW. And he saw potential in the spooky theatrical nature of Halloween, envisioning it as a perfect backdrop for a dramatic and engaging storyline. It's a little bit of Halloween for you. What else have I got? No, I thought I had a ghost, but I don't. I've got a new sound system, everybody, so you might have different things coming in. The first event that took place was in 1989. It was Halloween Havoc 89, held on October the 28th at the Philadelphia Civic Center. And this Halloween Havoc really did set the scene for what was going to come. It set the precedent for that eerie, that intense atmosphere that Double H would become known for. The main event was the Thunderdome cage match featuring the legends of Ric Flair and Sting against the Great Muta and Terry Funk. Managed by Gary Hart and with Bruno Sammartino as the special referee. We will talk more about this later, but it was a chaotic blend of high spots and brutal wrestling set against the backdrop of an electrified, escape-proof cage. Yeah, I love WCW. We will talk about more about this match in a little bit later on, but basically what you've got to remember is this was inspired, if you will, by pop culture, specifically Mel Gibson's Mad Max film series, which kind of gave it a very unique feel and really did kind of create a new type of spectacle. I mean, if you think about what they've done with cinema matches, the movie feel, like the Matt Hardy Compound and the Deletion matches that they did in TNA, they kind of changed the mold. This match was trying to do the same thing, and whether or not it achieved it is a different type of feeling. But as we said, before Halloween Havoc, wrestling pay-per-views didn't really lean into themed events. And the Halloween Havoc's distinct spooky theme with the elaborate sets, the gothic imagery, and the Halloween promos really did show a level of creativity and imagination that hadn't been seen anywhere else. And it really did kind of inspire other companies, especially the WWE, to experiment with themed events. And the success of Halloween Havoc validated the concept of blending holiday themes with wrestling, leading later on, many years later, to the WWE's adoption of themed events like TLC and Hell in a Cell. But I kind of think that the themed events had already begun. If you think about the Survivor Series kicking off in 1987 with the team versus team dynamic. I mean, yes, it wasn't, spooky and it didn't have unique sets and stuff like that. But Vince was already doing it. The WWF were already doing a different format to what we've seen, just one-on-one or tag matches, was now a whole pay-per-view of 5-on-5 tags. Impact, TNA, did the same thing when they did Lethal Lockdown. The Lockdown pay-per-view, which was every match was behind a cage. For the cameraman, that must have been awful. For the viewer, it wasn't that fantastic. But the themed events really do add a different sort of layer and dynamic to us as the viewer in terms of what we're watching. And one thing that I especially loved about Halloween Havoc was the intros. And I think one of the most memorable ones was possibly the first or the second one, where they did a whole VT kind of kicking it off with Tony Schiavone in a haunted Halloween house. And the terrible acting by Tony Schiavone was just incredible. But it kind of goes to show what Halloween Havoc really was all about. All right, we're going to go to our first break of the evening. When we come back, we're going to be looking a bit more at some memorable matches and storylines. See you after this.
The shadows have unleashed a forgotten soul, awakening the evil within, releasing the havoc that is Halloween. Snickers presents Halloween Havoc.
Sunday, October 25th, live and only on pay-per-view. Call your cable or satellite company to order now.
The 1998 Halloween Havoc promo there that was aired for commercial use on TNT and all the Nitro programs and the Thunder programs. And Halloween Havoc 1998 is an interesting one because of the fact that you can now watch it for free in its entirety on YouTube, and it featured a rather interesting glitch. Go check it out. We'll let you see what the comments were on the Team MOW Facebook page when you've done it. But one thing about Halloween Havoc, it became synonymous with high-profile matches and some unforgettable storylines. And we're going to be spending a bit of time in a minute talking about some of those matches. But some of the highlights go back to 1997 between Eddie Guerrero and Rey Mysterio Jr. The Cruiserweight title was just that masterclass. In 1988, the main event between Goldberg and DDP was another highlight. The match was notable not just for quality, but for the fact that WCW experienced a significant technical glitch. Spoiler alert. Freeze yourself, turn your ears off for just a couple of seconds if you haven't seen the pay-per-view yet. What you should have done, it's 1998, it's almost 20 years ago. Cutting off the pay-per-view feed just as the match began. What that meant was viewers were left in the dark. WCW had to air the match for free the next night on Nitro. And despite this, it's remembered fondly for both its intensity and its technical prowess. But the one thing about Halloween Havoc that we haven't really talked about is how it was a catalyst and a launch pad for many wrestlers' career. And it was a stage really where established stars could further cement and solidify their legacies. An example of that is Sting, a mainstay in WCW, used the event to cement his status as a top star, with matches against Jake Roberts in 92's Spin the Wheel, Make the Deal, which showcased his versatility and his ability to deliver in high-stakes environment. It also allowed for creative freedom, letting guys like Mick Foley, who performed as Cactus Jack, and Big Van Vader engage in brutal, hard-hitting matches that really wouldn't be allowed today, but are still being talked about today. And the influence on Halloween Havoc extends to today's wrestling promotions. WCW may not be around anymore, but its impact in professional wrestling is still talked about to this day. And WWE have even recognized that, because since the purchase of WCW back in 2001, they kind of brought different things in, such as War Games, which was synonymous with WCW, like the Great American Bash pay-per-view that was brought back for a cup of coffee. But in NXT, they've really embraced it, and they revived Halloween Havoc for the NXT brand, which, when you consider the WWE's ability to really showcase bits and pieces, this is a whole new stratosphere for the brand. And it means that Halloween Havoc is now being seen by a whole new audience, a whole new generation of wrestling fans. It's that father and son moment where when you watched Halloween Havoc back in WCW in the 90s, you were a kid. Now you've got your own kid and you're watching NXT and you're sharing Halloween Havoc. And they've kept some of the concepts, such as the spin the wheel, not the same way. Luckily, they haven't done the Chamber of Horrors. I never want to see that again in wrestling. But, you know, there we go. And I like watching Halloween Havoc. I'm not going to say it's my favourite pay-per-view of the year. You know, I'm not sure why. I like it for its uniqueness. But I find with WCW, it's always a mixed bag, you know, in terms of quality. And that's what we're going to look at now, is the quality of the matches that took place. And we've already referenced one earlier on. 1997, it was the WCW Cruiserweight Championship match, Mask versus title, Eddie Guerrero versus Rey Mysterio. And it's universally praised for its high-flying, innovative offense and impeccable storytelling. Guerrero, no wonder the guy is a Hall of Famer. Same with Mysterio. But in 1997, they were at the peak of their careers. You couldn't get any better than these two cruiserweights in professional wrestling. They delivered this adrenaline-pumping showcase of what a cruiserweight division should be. Forget the light heavyweight division in the WWF. Yeah, no, that nothing. They encapsulated everything, mixing in the Mexican lucha libre style with the American and the European technical style. This was absolutely incredible. You then mixed in Guerrero's aggressive heel tactics and combined that with Mysterio's resilience and awe-inspiring aerial moves. Really was a marriage made in heaven. And the match concluded with Mysterio executing a stunning Hurricanrana into a pinfall, cementing it as a defining moment for WCW's Cruiserweight division and a testament to their in-ring chemistry. And it's still talked about, even in the video games. I can't remember if it was, I don't think it was 2K23. It might have been, I think it was 2K22. The one that had Rey Mysterio on the cover, I'm sure that was 2K22. In the showcase, the first match you had to compete in was Rey Mysterio versus Eddie Guerrero from 1997, Halloween Havoc. So for that to be picked as one of the top matches in both Guerrero and Mysterio's career is a testament. And you can still sit there and read it and enjoy it to this day. Next up was the WCW World Heavyweight title match. And it was Goldberg versus DDP from 1998, which we've kind of referenced earlier on. But at this point, Goldberg was amid this legendary undefeated streak and was destroying everyone. You know, it was so good. He must have been working about 20 matches per day when WCW wasn't on air, because every time you listened to Shivani on Nitro, it had gone up astronomically. But you could only do that for so long. And what Goldberg and the fans were finding were boredom. The format, the formula of what they were doing with Goldberg at this point was becoming stale. Fans in attendance and watching on pay-per-view, they wanted to see what else Goldberg could do, apart from come in, do a spear, and then do a jackhammer. DDP won War Games at Fall Brawl the month before to earn the title shot. And really, his popularity was such that the fans have become to love DDP. They've become to recognise and appreciate what he could do, and they really would not have taken to Goldberg being involved in a squash. And to that end, something different was needed. And when you think about Diamond Dallas Page, and you think about the fact that, you know, he hadn't been wrestling for that long, if anyone in the fans' view, and quite possibly in Bischoff's view as well, could pull a good match out of Goldberg, it was the master of the Diamond Cutter. Bang! Intensity was in every move. And Goldberg used his strength to gain the upper hand, but DDP stayed on him like white on rice. DDP mixed up his attacks. He wasn't just doing the running around. He was trying to get Goldberg off his vertical base. The challenger took full advantage, fighting a one-armed Goldberg, who eventually hit the spear but hurt the shoulder even more. Brilliant storyline here. Goldberg couldn't lift DDP for the jackhammer. He tried, only to catch that beautifully executed Diamond Cutter, which was, you know, the RKO. And at this point, the atmosphere in the MGM Grand went through the roof, because it looked like it was going to be a WrestleMania moment. It looked like it was going to be WCW's version of the Undertaker streak coming to an end. DDP went for the cover. The Diamond Cutter is normally it. That's normally what puts them out. But Goldberg kicked out. He used the momentum off a suplex counter to hit the jackhammer for the win. And it really was Goldberg's first hard-fought win for a story. And DDP was the perfect opponent for that. The inaugural Halloween Havoc's main event in 1989 set a standard of quality with its unique stipulations and star-studded lineup. Thunderdome, the electrified cage, the no-escape rules added a unique stipulation and flair, pardon the pun, to Flair and Sting's teamwork. And also the heel work of Muta and Funk created this really different dynamic. And then when you add the inclusion of Bruno Sammartino as the special referee, added a historic significance. And this match was chaotic, it was brutal, it was high profile, made it one of the most memorable spectacles. And really showcasing what Herd wanted, this ethos of blending horror and wrestling. And of course, you know, we've talked about the Thunderdome, we've talked about Flair and Sting, great Muta and Terry Funk. But this wasn't the only time that Flair appears in the top match list, because in 1994, him and Hulk Hogan faced off at Halloween Havoc for the WCW World Championship. And what makes this match, you know, stand out from the crowd is because these two are icons, possibly two of the greatest, if not the greatest icons in professional wrestling. And they've stood across the ring from each other on many, many different occasions. Hogan won the title from Flair in his WCW debut, but lost the rematch via countout. And the rubber match occurred in a steel cage, and their careers were on the line. Hogan had his working boots on and wrestled with an intensity as you have never seen before. Flair didn't need to. Flair was, as Ric Flair is, on point. could deliver. What made this one unique was Mr. T was back in the ring from WrestleMania 1. This time, he was the official, and he wasn't very good. I don't know how many times we had, I pity the fool. But anyway, Bobby Heenan challenged his legendary 1992 Royal Rumble performance on commentary. He loved Flair as much as he hated Hogan. And the crowd in Detroit were hot for this one. Flair sold being choked on the top of the cage. Mr. T called it like a regular match instead of the no DQ caged affair. No one was heartbroken when he took a bump, and Flair stomped him out. Sensational Sherry had an MVP performance. She climbed the cage to help Flair. Jimmy Hart, who was still a face at this point, ran interference but accidentally pulled off a dress. That didn't stop Sherry. She kept climbing until Sting pulled her down moments later. Sherry climbed the cage one more time, leapt off the top barefoot to double axe handle the Hulkster. What a moment. You know, you don't see that in the WWF, do you? The end of the match obviously came with the typical Hulk Hogan Hulk up, but it doesn't matter. Two legendary careers at stake in this match, and both of them went out there as though it was their last match ever. In 1990, the WCW tag team titles were on the line. The Steiners went up against the Nasty Boys. And just for a moment, I just want you to take a second, just think about what that scene looked like. So I want you to picture a comic book style street fight. You've got, on the one side, you've got the amateur wrestlers. You've got Rick and Scott. On the other side, you've got two hooligans in Knobs and Sags. All four men were stiff. All four men could work. And I tell you what, this one delivered, even outside of the ring. Because after the match was done and the Steiners walked out victorious, the post-match saw some trick-or-treat action as Sags, who was dressed as a concession stand worker, leveled Scott Steiner, Big Papa Pump, in a blindside attack while being interviewed by Tony Schiavone. Trick or treat, boys. Gotta love it. In 1997, DDP was back in the top 10 list, going up against the Macho Man. Ooh, yeah! Randy Savage in the Las Vegas sudden death match. And what is fair to say is that Savage and DDP never had a bad match with each other. You know, they had this ability to put out this atmosphere of hatred as though they could not stand anybody. But there was a decent amount of respect, right? Miss Elizabeth got involved. Kimberly got involved. Controversy reared its head like it did in all the NWO matches. A fake Sting that later was revealed to be Hulk Hogan cracked DDP in the chest with a baseball bat, which gave the Macho Man the win. And actually, if you look at the awards for WCW, the 1997 Feud of the Year belonged to Savage and DDP. They put on 3, not 1, not 2, but 3 incredible 5-star pay-per-view matches that really did cement DDP as this main event player. More people are making a return appearance because now Rey Mysterio is back, this time going up against the Iceman Dean Malenko in 1996 for the WCW. Can you guess what championship it was? That's right, the Cruiserweight title. In the opening match of Halloween Havoc, right? And the Cruiserweight division really was on fire in 1996. When you think about, you know, some of the guys that were in there, such as Rey, such as the Iceman, such as Eddie Guerrero. And this match between Guerrero and the Man of the Thousand Holds was the rubber match. They were actually 2-2 against each other. This one, though, was personal. Malenko had ripped off Mysterio's mask on an episode of Saturday Night. And in true wrestling kayfabe style, the only thing that kept Mysterio's identity a secret was Schiavone throwing a coat over him. To make matters even worse, Malenko came out with the stolen mask. Mysterio retrieved it and put it on. I mean, this is what storytelling is all about. In 1993, one of the most unrecognized championships, underappreciated championships, was on the line against two of the UK greats. It was what I call the Battle of Britain. Lord Steven Regal facing off against the British Bulldog, Davey Boy Smith. And on paper, you would think this would be a battle of the Bulldog's power against Steven Regal's technical ability. But what it did was it ended up as a European-style grappling duel. Regal at this point was the pompous aristocrat. Davey Boy Smith was the Manchester-fueled man of the people, right? Regal looked down on him. He considered Bulldog to be just a lowly commoner, not worthy of his time. And for most of the match, he out-wrestled his opponents. But the Bulldog flipped it and out-wrestled Regal. Bear in mind, the British Bulldog had been trained by Robbie Brookside. The British Bulldog had competed in the UK. The British Bulldog, same with Regal, the British Bulldog had spent time in the Hart family. As 15-minute time limit started to approach, Regal began to stall. And a timing miscue saw Bulldog hit the running power slam too early. It was meant to be the finish. That error gave Regal no choice but to kick out of the finisher. And with seconds left, Bulldog delivered a pile driver in a photo finish, with Regal retaining again due to a time limit draw. This one, you need to go and watch on the network before the network is shut down. It's a classic, but unappreciated. 1993 also saw our next match, the Texas Death Match between Vader and Cactus Jack, because Vader at this point was the monster of WCW. He hadn't had the Scissorgate incident with Arn Anderson, with Paul Orndorff. He hadn't been fired. And Cactus Jack Mick Foley was the only man crazy enough to not fear the monster Vader. And Jack returned in the fall of 1993 after recovering from the amnesia-induced beating by Vader. Sorry, I'm laughing because I can remember being sat at my nan's house here in the UK as a wee little lad, and on a Saturday afternoon just before Baywatch. So we used to have The Fall Guy with Steve, with Lee Majors. Then we used to have Knight Rider with David Hasselhoff. Then it was WCW Saturday Night, or WCW Worldwide, sorry, with, I think, the Body, Jesse Ventura and Schiavone on the call. And then you went straight into Baywatch. And I can remember this one moment where I was watching Worldwide and they did the amnesia angle with Cactus Jack sat in a dump yard, in a scrap yard, with Sting trying to find him. And Jack doesn't know who he is, and it was just, oh my God, it was so, yeah, it was terrible. Oh, it was awful. But it was so funny. Really, really, yeah. Really was bad. I mean, this one was a spin the wheel, make the deal stipulation, which followed on from Jake and Sting the year earlier, which came up with a really lame idea of the Coal Miners Club. And really, this match needed to beat that. Otherwise, spin the wheel was going to be the staple of Halloween Havoc. It wouldn't have worked. It stopped on the Texas Death Match. It hasn't aged well due to the stop and start action of what was the most confusing rule set in wrestling history. A 30-second break after each pinfall, followed by 10 seconds for the wrestler to get to their feet. So 40 seconds, there was no action taking place. Oh, God. WCW. Oh, dear. What made this one even worse was the fact that it headlined Halloween Havoc 1993. And even though Vader was the WCW World Champion at the time, it was a non-title match. It did deliver, though, on making Spin the Wheel concept a success, finally, and it also put Foley on the map as a top-level performer. But by God, it was painful together. 1995 saw Sting and Ric Flair versus Arn Anderson and Brian Pillman. We touched on this one in the archives previously. But in 1995, we were in this feud between Anderson and Flair that no one expected to ever see. And we then saw the inclusion of the loose cannon Brian Pillman, who teamed up with Anderson, and they teased a reunion of the Four Horsemen minus the Nature Boy. And because of Flair's reputation, nobody wanted to team up with the Nature Boy to face off against Anderson and Pillman. So he had to go out and convince Sting. And Sting accepted. And we get to the match. And then we're told that Flair had been taken out prior. And Sting was going alone in a handicap match. As Sting was holding his own, he was being beaten up to a pulp. All of a sudden, the Nature Boy appeared. The crowd went nuts. He wasn't in his ring gear. He was still in his, his slacks and his shirt. And he cheered Sting to tag him in. Sting got the hot tag. It was, quite simply, one of the best, most anticipated hot tags you will ever see. What happened afterwards was Flair decked the Stinger with a sucker punch that even knocked down the referee. And it was all a setup. It was a trick to go along with the treats of Halloween Havoc. Flair looked into the camera. He ripped off the bandage, revealing the absence of any injury. And it was a reset, not only for the Four Horsemen, but for Flair's career and reigniting the feud between the Icon Sting and the Nature Boy Ric Flair. So they are some of the treats, but there were also some tricks. And after the break, we're going to look at some of the matches that you never want to talk about again, but unfortunately, I've got to. We'll see you after this.
Just didn't get out. And now the focus will go on this, in this small cage. It contains the chair of torture, as it's being called. The objective now is to get a member of a team in there. And when the lever is pulled, which is mounted on the side of the big cage, at that time, someone's going to get a rather shocking experience, and this match will then end. Rick Steiner is in there. No one is near the lever. The lever you can see in the very right part of your screen on the big cage there.
Welcome back to Legends and Champions. That footage you just heard was taken from one of the tricks of Halloween Havoc. And I'll tell you more in just a second. All right, so let's look at some of the worst matches now. And we're kicking off with 1991. Bill Kazmaier versus Oz. One of the, at the time, 24 guys or so, however we want to call it, who billed themselves as the world's strongest man. Bill Kazmaier was beefy, but he really wasn't cut out to be a professional wrestler. And whoever decided to put him up against the rookie Kevin Nash as Oz really did mean to put on what was a bad match. And to be honest, that's what we got. The one benefit was it was short. Oz hit a few moves before Kazmaier got a shoulder block and a torture rack for the quick win. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was the end of Oz. But even that, even being able to destroy Oz and remove him, didn't help Kazmaier in the long run, and he left shortly afterwards. 1997, Halloween Havoc was not only known for the terrible Hogan-Piper main event, but it capped off one of the better undercards that WCW had had at that time. But this match was rated worse than the main event for a good reason. And that was Alex Wright versus Mongo Steve McMichael. The storyline was that Michael's wife, Deborah, who was now managing Wright, and it was a total mismatch of styles. Not helped by the announcers talking about the rest of the show, Mongo had the only pin for Goldberg to interfere to lay him out and let Wright get the victory. It was a poor match that, as we said, only outdone by the attention on that really awful main event. This whole card that we're going to go through seems like the worst Halloween Havoc in history, because in 2000 we had a DNA match. Could anybody tell me what a DNA match was? That's right. It was a first blood. Yeah. And it was between two workers that can't work. Buff Bagwell and David Flair. And yeah, let's be honest, David Flair was only in WCW because of one reason. Daddy. The name. And David wasn't a good worker. It showed. He put on a really poor performance trying to replicate the Nature Boy Ric Flair. And Bagwell really didn't seem to know what was going on. It was a match that didn't belong on a pay-per-view. And it really highlighted not only how bad they both were, but how David was really unsuited for wrestling. And the bad matches continue. I mean, this is a really painful list, right? Van Hammer went up against Doug Summers in 1991. And Van Hammer was one of those comic book characters, right? You talk about the WWF with Doink the Clown. This was WCW's version. And he was supposed to be this heavy metal rocker who had no idea how to play a guitar. And originally this match was supposed to be Van Hammer against Michael P.S. Hayes, but Hayes couldn't appear. So instead, Doug Summers, who may have been good back in the day, was long overdue in his prime, was a substitute. And it was a squash match. It lasted barely a minute before Van Hammer won. The benefit, though, is at least it was shorter than other bouts that we're going to talk about, but it's not a match. I mean, it's just painful. Next up, if we talk about a bad match at a pay-per-view, we've got to talk about how bad a pay-per-view was. And in 1995, Halloween Havoc produced a god-awful pay-per-view with a really bad main event. Hulk Hogan versus The Giant. But the match that we're about to talk about now actually was rated by Dave Meltzer lower than Hogan versus The Giant, and it was the total package facing off against Meng, or Haku. And it was the first of two matches that Luger would have that night, and it just didn't work. And the storyline didn't work because of the fact that really what happened at the end of the night was Luger joined the Dungeon of Doom. So why was Luger facing the Dungeon of Doom in the opening match? It didn't make sense. It made no sense, everybody. Don't know what was going on. 1990, the Fabulous Freebirds went up against the Renegade Warriors, and it's never a good sign when the heels are cheered and the baby faces are booed. And that is what happened when Chris and Mark Youngblood, known as the Renegade Warriors, entered the ring. They never connected with the crowd. And what that meant was Jimmy Garvin and Michael P.S. Hayes getting cheered through the roof. The biggest ovation I think they ever had. It totally threw them off their game. At one point in this match, there was a chin lock by Michael Hayes that was put on Chris Youngblood that was held for 4 minutes. 4 minutes in a chin lock. Wow. Chris Youngblood spent 15 minutes in the ring before a hot tag. Then Hayes hit the DDT to do the win. It was 18 minutes, with roughly 2 of them being action. I mean, it's just the worst tag team match in history. If anybody can tell me a worse match, let me know. I want to see this match. I don't know why I want to see it, but I want to see it. If you can tell me a worse tag team match in history that beats this one, let me know, and the footage, and I will watch it, and I will review it on this show. Now, the audio you heard at the top of this segment was from the 1991 Halloween Havoc and Chamber of Horrors, and it makes a lot of argument and a lot of sense that one of the most infamously horrible, badly produced, badly designed matches in WCW history got the lowest of the low from Dave Meltzer. And it really shouldn't have done when you look at the talent. Sting, Vader, Jack, Abdullah the Butcher, the Steiner Brothers, Scott Hall. In a cage. It could have been fantastic. But WCW decided they were going to bring the concept of an electric chair. And someone had to get fried. And the action, which was goofy before Abdullah got tossed in the chair and Jack hit the lever accidentally, with Abdullah the Butcher acting like he was shocked. This only shocking thing was the rating for this match wasn't lower. I mean, it was just awful. And I just don't have any energy to go through any others except for these two. 1992, Rick Rude versus Masahiro Chono. And just a few weeks prior, they had had a brilliant match in Japan for the NWA World title. And this one was just the ultimate letdown. It wasn't bad, it was just boring. It dragged on for over 20 minutes. And to make it worse, there were 2 referees. One American and the other Japanese. And it just didn't work. But the worst match ever in Halloween Havoc history got -5 stars by Meltzer. It was the rematch from WrestleMania 6. Hulk Hogan versus the Ultimate Warrior. And what this match showed was how good the agents were in the WWF, because nothing went right. There was a botched test of strength. There was a bizarre trip by rolling bit. There was a fireball that went completely wrong. And it really was a mercy to everybody when Horace Hogan hit the Warrior and allowed Hogan to get the pin. The only bright spot for this is that WCW didn't make it the main event, but it's still one, if not the worst match ever in wrestling history. And I mean, it's just god awful. Oh, that's made me depressed. That has really made me depressed. Right, let's go to our last break of the evening. When we come back, we're going to wrap up. I'll see you on the other side of this, guys.
You got to stream the alternate commentary table. Every single Saturday, it's brought to you on the McGuire on Wrestling feed. I'm one half of your host, Dimitri Karolis, and I'm here with my partner, Mitch Hondras. Mitch, what is the alternate commentary table?
It's simple. It's the perspective of wrestling from the other side of the railing, the real fans.
That's right, the perspective that you need. You might have a little bit of fun, too. The alternate commentary table. Subscribe free now to the McGuire on Wrestling podcast feed wherever you get your podcast. Cha-cha!
If you like McGuire on Wrestling, you need to subscribe to the free McGuire on Wrestling podcast feed. Not only do you get access to the show a day early, but you also get free bonus content every week. Share a laugh with Mitch and Dimitri on the alternate commentary table.
Oh, I'm Cody Rhodes. Look at me.
Now, if this was Damian Priest, he'd apologize.
He probably would have apologized.
Follow along with the film career of one of wrestling's biggest stars with We've Seen a Movie.
Basically, I'm just watching John Cena play his wrestling character.
If John Cena was a raging
alcoholic Atlantic City mooch before this.
Get all these shows, exclusive interviews, and more for free by subscribing to McGuire on Wrestling, wherever you get your podcasts.
And that's it for this week. We're coming up to the wrap-up of this week's edition of the show. But what I want to do as we wrap this is to kind of put a nice little bow on Halloween Havoc, because regardless of what was good or what was bad, it really is a testament to how ambitious and also creative WCW were. It showcases a period where they were willing to experiment and push boundaries to captivate and entice an audience. And as we said, it's remembered not just for its matches, but its presentation, its atmosphere. And it really is a beloved part of wrestling history, which kind of symbolizes this time of creative, compelling, competitive storytelling. And Halloween Havoc holds a special place for all of us. Its unique blend of horror and wrestling really did create unforgettable moments, and the horror were some of the matches. And whether it's the innovative matches, the dramatic storylines, or the memorable performances, Halloween Havoc legacy lives on as a highlight of the golden years of WCW. And that's it for this week. I'll be back next week with more LAC. Don't forget, we have got a lot coming up on the podcast feed this week, including Saturday. Mitch and Dimitri are back with the alternate commentary table. Shout out to Mitch, who did a cracking solo show last week. Really enjoyed it. And then Sunday, Mike is back with McGuire on Wrestling, of course accompanied by Dave Meltzer. They're going to have the top 5 plus all of the rundown of everything that's happened, with so much happening. So much is broken in the last 24 hours in world of professional wrestling. All that's left for me to say is thank you for joining me. Interact with all of us at Team MOW on Facebook. Great community there. Really chatty, really wanting to get involved and get a conversation going. And stay tuned for more on that. You can head over to McGuireOnWrestling.com to find out more about us and find out more about the shows and to listen to the archives, or you can search for us on all main podcast providers. Just search for McGuire on Wrestling. But for now, that's it for me. I am off to go trick or treating. I'm not going to tell you what I'm dressed up as, but let's just say it's got a heavy metal guitar. I'll see you next week for more LAC. Until then, so long everybody. I'll see you at the matches. Bye bye now.
This has been Legends and Champions with Andy Evans. Thank you for listening.